extradited
so do not
today.
claim that Venezuela is a victory. It's not. It's yet.
Trump's got an 80% approval rating in Venezuela right now.
That's not true. And let me just tell you this.
Yeah.
Let me tell you this. The woman who was the party who was legally elected in Venezuela is somewhere out in exile because he has made a pact with Maduro's number 2.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. So glad you're here with me again. Today we are stepping straight into a primetime panel that absolutely did not hold back. The numbers are sliding, the war keeps dragging, and the room could not agree on what any of it actually means. On one side, you have folks insisting the pressure campaign is a roaring success, and on the other, you have Dr. Cornel West and a panel cutting right through the spin, calling the whole thing an illegal and immoral war, while a defender keeps trying to sell it as a win. Trust me, you are going to want to stick around through the whole thing, because the back half is where the gloves really come off, and one claim gets shut down on live television. Before we get rolling, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing how far this little community reaches. All right, enough from me. Let's get into it.
If you look at it, how Trump is handling his job as president among registered voters, I mean, there's the numbers there. Trump's handling of the war in Iran, those numbers are very similar to his handling of the job as a whole, with 65% of people disapproving. Will this go to help him or hurt him as he's continuing to do this thing where he says, I'm going to attack, okay, now I'm not going to attack, and it's all been done sort of to the public, but not to Congress? Peter?
No, it's been done to the public, but that is also the fact that we're not sitting in the negotiation rooms, and whether that's happening in Islamabad, whether that's happening with emissaries from Qatar, from Oman, or whether that's in other channels that the U.S. has, we're only seeing the tip of this much more delicate regional and specific picture. Frankly, time is very much not on the Iranian side from their longevity as a regime. Time is also not on this administration side, just when it comes to gas prices in the midterm. So the fact that the president is holding off, I think, does send a signal that there could be a far more significant development in the short term, especially coming on the heels of the president's trip to China, where Xi Jinping, very notably, and the Chinese government, Xi Jinping, does not like to get into domestic affairs of other countries because they don't want anyone talking about their Uyghur problem or anything else. Or I should say their horrific treatment of the Uyghurs and the human rights abuses. But Xi Jinping said Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. We agree on that component, and the Strait of Hormuz should be open. That's a very significant concession.
But he didn't offer anything to open.
Well,
what is he going to do?
But
I mean,
let me challenge that.
They are suffering economically. The Chinese retail consumption was 3 points off expectations yesterday. It was 0.2%, barely grew year over year.
I mean, there's a lot that China can do to pressure Iran.
Yeah.
I mean, including turning off their intel sharing with Iran to target American troops.
That would be
a big one.
Right. But right now, the Chinese are suffering from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Of course.
Maybe not more than other folks in Asia, but certainly a heck of a lot more.
But I think this administration wanted to walk away from that summit with Xi Jinping with a win, to say that, yes, the Chinese president is in fact going to put pressure on Iran. And they didn't get that.
There was additional daylight that grew up. While Xi Jinping and Donald Trump were talking, the Iranians seized a Chinese flagged ship and impounded it. I mean, some of the messages coming out of Iran of like, this is a betrayal of the alliance that we had. I mean, that daylight, it may not be a mile wide, but if it was a crack, I mean, you can see to the other side.
I do want to mention that the Chinese Xi Jinping had said this before this meeting with Trump, that the Strait of Hormuz should be open. Obviously, China's suffering as well, in a much bigger way even than the United States. And, that they would like to see a closure to this war.
But the nuclear component and Iran not being a nuclear power, that was a significant development.
Cornel, how do you see this and the way this war is being handled? Because Americans are very, very concerned about it, especially since it's gone on far longer than they were expecting, than they were told.
I always try to look at the world through the lens of the least of these, the people who are suffering the most vulnerable. And so when I look in Iran, I see people dealing with execution, subjugation, domination, repression. They're human beings like anybody else. I say the same thing about Gaza and genocide. I say the same thing about black folk in Harlem. Same thing about poor whites in Kentucky. There's got to be a moral and spiritual lens. And when you look through the world through moral and spiritual lens, which for me as a Christian, look at the world through the lens of the cross, it looks like you're always headed toward crucifixion, because they're the ones who get crucified for the most part. You see, the everyday people, the poor people. And so we see the gangsters at the top, manipulating, playing power politics, crushing the people in their own respective contexts, and we end up with a dialogue that's deodorized at the top, that hiding the funk of the suffering and the unbelievable blood that's flowing. So in that sense, I have a critique across the board, but when I see the war, it's an illegal, it's an immoral war, but at the same time, I see an immoral regime in Iran.
Let me start right where it counts, because this is the number the people running this thing do not want you sitting with. When the panel pointed out that 65% of the country disapproves of how this war is being handled, that is not a rough news cycle. That is 2 out of every 3 Americans looking at a war and saying no. You have to understand what that means. A government waging a war that most of its own people reject is a government operating completely outside the consent it claims to represent. And here is the part that blows my mind. The whole reason this keeps dragging is that the administration wanted a trophy. They walked into that summit in China expecting to come home and announce the world was falling in line behind them. And they came home with nothing. The Iranians even seized a Chinese flagged ship while the meeting was still going. So much for the Grand Coalition. But the moment that actually stayed with me came from Cornel. Cornel said this: "I always try to look at the world through the lens of the least of these, the people who are suffering, the most vulnerable. That lens almost never makes it onto cable news, because while everyone argues about polls and summits, there are ordinary Iranian families, people who never chose any of this, living under bombs they did not ask for." And then Cornel went further. He said this: "It is an illegal, it is an immoral war, but at the same time I see immoral regime in Iran. Here is what people miss. Holding both of those at once is not weakness. It is the only honest position in that room. You can despise a government and still refuse to cheer for dropping fire on the people trapped beneath. The civilians of Iran are not the regime. They are the ones paying for a fight the powerful started and the powerless never wanted."
You're saying 2 things can be true at the same time.
2 things can be true at the same time.
How is this going to play out, you think, if this war continues to linger on? Obviously, the gas prices and all the cost of the war to the American public, to the regular person, hitting pretty hard. How do you see this playing out for the midterms? Do you think it's going to...
It's not good for Republicans. It's not good for Trump. I mean, the numbers don't lie, and the numbers have been fairly consistent. I don't know how many regular Americans who are trying to put food at the table, who are taking care of their children, who are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, are really following every development of this war. I think most people are like, just wake me up when it's over, and it's not over. Every day it lingers on more and more. I also think, you know, when I see and read these threats by Trump, it's a little reminiscent of Taco, right? Trump always chickens out. It's a little, this is the same guy who threatened Iran with complete eradication of their civilization during the Easter weekend. So it's like the little president who cried wolf a little too much. And I think something we can all agree on is that the messaging around this war has been disorganized, undisciplined, and not very effective. And I think that this zigzagging and threatening and screaming, you know, at the kids in the yard by Trump doesn't help the messaging issue.
Do you think it's been disorganized and the messaging just kind of all over the place?
Look, I think the president's been pretty clear. His number one objective is he does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That's been his top priority. He said it again today. He says it virtually every day. He didn't really make a political decision. He made a national security decision, which is what we elect commanders-in-chief to do. He decided that they were on the brink of getting a nuclear weapon. He wasn't going to permit it. It's his red line, and he is enforcing it. And he's really sort of set politics aside. I mean, the polling is pretty clear on it, but he has kind of set politics aside and said, I can't worry about politics all the time. Sometimes I have to worry about national security, and that's his choice. And a lot of this rests on his shoulder. Respectfully, if I might disagree regarding chickening out, I don't think the top level of the Iranian regime that we took out in the opening hours of this war would think that he chickened out. Probably don't see it that way right now. We inflicted massive military damage against the top layer of Iranian leadership, against their military sites, and so on and so forth. We have sunk their navy. We have set them back years upon years upon years in terms of what they would like to do to be able to export terror around the world. The final thing is, can you get to a deal where you can guarantee to the American people no nuclear weapons for these butchers? If we get there, that is a victory, and I think if we get there soon, the American people will see that as a good thing.
He thinks he can use pressure tactics like he did in Venezuela. Like
Which
he's
worked.
doing. like he's doing. They didn't
Well, this
work.
is a very different country.
Yeah, he took Maduro out, but there's still
same
political
regime was there.
prisoners
Yeah,
there,
same regime,
and a lot of
Alex
the
Saab was just
Venezuela.
extradited
So do not
today.
claim that Venezuela is a victory. It's not. It's yet.
Trump's got an 80% approval rating in Venezuela right now.
That's not true. And let me just tell
it's
you
true,
this.
yeah.
Let me tell you this. The woman who was the party who was legally elected in Venezuela is
Delcy
somewhere out in
Rodriguez.
exile because he has
Marina.
made a pact with Maduro's number 2. And Maduro's worst executors are still running around free in Venezuela, terrorizing the Venezuelan people. There are still political prisoners. But he thought that he could, he used all sorts of scare tactics with Venezuela. He's using all sorts of scare tactics to tighten the screws on Cuba. But those are, smaller countries without a real military and really not much of an option but to fold. Iran is a completely different game, and I think these scare tactics of his just are not having the same effect because they have an incredible tolerance, more than I thought they would have, of enduring pain and pressure.
This is where it gets almost embarrassing to watch. One of the panelists put it flat out that none of this is good for the party in power and that the numbers do not lie. He is right, but I want to go deeper than the politics. The real story is that regular people, folks working 2 and 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, are being asked to swallow the cost of a war nobody in charge can even explain to them. Then came the line that nails it. The panelists said this. It is a little reminiscent of Taco. Always chickens out. The little president who cried wolf a little too much. And honestly, that is the entire pattern. You threaten total destruction one week, you back off the next, you threaten again, and you expect the world to keep flinching. That is not strength. That is a performance of strength from someone who never had a plan underneath it. Here is what people do not realize. Empty threats are not harmless. The same panelist said the messaging has been disorganized, undisciplined, like screaming at the kids in the yard. When the most powerful military on earth runs on mood swings, it is the people on the receiving end, the Iranian civilians, who live inside that uncertainty every single day. They do not get to log off the war. And then the defender of all this tried to spin it. He held up Venezuela like it proved the pressure playbook works. Cornel was not having it. Cornel said this, "So do not claim that Venezuela is a victory. It is not. That is not true." And he was right. The legally elected leader got shoved into exile while a quiet deal was cut with the regime's number 2. That is not a victory. That is a magic trick. And the lesson Iran already took from watching it is simple. Bowing to these threats buys you absolutely nothing.
Butchery. You got butchery in Gaza. You got butchery on the West Bank. You got butchery in Tehran. You got butchery going on. If all we do is just butchery, is butchery all the way down. What does that mean? It's over. People reach a point where they have a contempt for humanity. We no longer have the capacity to express love, care, and concern for others, let alone the least of these. That's what's sad. It's butchery all the way down, though, brother.
But in our case, we're taking on the butchers. The case of
But
Iran's
America
regime,
has this history of butchery too.
They butcher their own people. They drag them out into the street.
That's
They
true.
hang them. They
That's
behead
true.
them.
40,000 this year.
If women
true.
don't wear the right clothes, or they take
true.
off their.
That's exactly right. We got butchery and slavery and
terrible.
Jim Crow and lynching. We got butchery in Gaza. You got butchery in Venezuela. You got, this is Jonathan Swift all the way down. All right, we're on the way to misanthropy.
Should we have looked the other way on Iran?
I think that we could come up with ways of minimizing the butchery.
You know
Yes.
what? On that,
yes,
I
think
actually
we
think
can. I think we
Operation
can.
Midnight Hammer
think
was so successful and was so well executed and done that they were on their back foot. And I think if the president had started from negotiating from there and not launched this war, because at the end of the day, Iran doesn't have a navy, but they closed the strait, and they still close the strait. And so I think if the president had done a recalculation of starting from Midnight Hammer and going from there to the negotiating table, it would be we'd be having a different
We did, though.
conversation.
We sent Witkoff and Kushner, and they came in and said, our opening position is we have enough material to make 11 nuclear bombs. They communicated to the president that they had no intention of giving up their nuclear material or their pursuit
The
of nuclear
nuclear facilities
weapons.
that were
That's
hit
the
in
red
Operation
line.
Midnight Hammer are still in the same place that they were
I
in this
agree.
war because we haven't hit them.
Well,
So we have not actually hit their nuclear arsenal.
I mean, we dramatically destroyed their facilities last year, but their intentions, their material, their idea, these are
Their intentions are going to,
fanatics.
I mean, you talked about this president not launching a political war, but he did. I mean, he took out the Ayatollah. That changed political leadership in the country. But I think the miscalculation here is how ingrained the IRGC is into the Iranian society and the hold that they have. That's not going to change with
But also
a few
economically
bombs.
dependent on a lot of the facilities that have been struck, like their steel production
Yes,
facilities.
they are, but they are still holding their position, even with all of the suffering that's going on in the country. We will leave this there.
And this is where Cornel said the thing I cannot stop turning over. He said this. People reach a point where they have a contempt for humanity. We no longer have the capacity to express love, care, and concern for others. Sit with that for a second, because that is the real cost of endless war. It is not only the rubble and the lives, it is what it does to us, the people watching, when we start treating other human beings as numbers on a map. And here is the part that should end the whole debate. The defenders kept talking like this campaign crushed the threat, but one panelist quietly dropped the truth. He said this: the nuclear facilities that were in Operation Midnight Hammer are still in the same place because we haven't hit them. Let that land. All the noise, all the threats, all the suffering, and the exact thing they claim to be stopping is still sitting right where it always was. So what was any of this for? Let me break down why this matters, and let me hand you something history already settled. In the Second World War, the bombing of London was meant to break the will of the British people. It did the opposite. They dug in, they hardened, they refused to bend. That is not my opinion. That is documented history. Pressure from the sky does not shatter a population. It welds them together. And the panelist landed in exactly that spot when he said this. They are still holding their position even with all of the suffering that's going on in the country. That is the whole story in one breath. The Iranian people are absorbing pain that was chosen for them by leaders far away, and they are not folding because human beings under threat almost never do. So before anyone cheers for the next strike, ask the honest question Cornel was really asking. What is left of our own humanity when we keep choosing this? The ones who started this war will be just fine. The ordinary families living under it will not. And that, to me, is the part nobody in power wants you thinking about for too long. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.